I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. If you don't like living with us, feel free to leave, Emma said, standing in my kitchen like she owned the place. I felt my blood pressure spike as I clutched the edge of the counter for support. This was my house, the home my husband Richard had left me when he passed away 2 years ago. Yet here was my daughter-in-law telling me to leave. My name is Kimberly Davis. I'm 67 years old, and until 8 months ago, I lived peacefully in my 4-bedroom colonial in Maple Heights. Then my son Joshua lost his job at the accounting firm. "Just temporarily, Mom," he'd said, showing up at my doorstep with Emma and their 2 suitcases. "Until I get back on my feet." I believed him. After 40 years of teaching high school English, I developed a pretty good sense for when someone was lying. But I'd missed the signs with Joshua. Or maybe I just wanted to believe my only son wouldn't take advantage of his widowed mother. The morning Emma suggested I leave my own home, I'd been making coffee when they stumbled into the kitchen around 10 a.m. 8 months of living rent-free had created a pattern. They slept late, ate my food, used my utilities, and contributed nothing. "I was thinking," I said carefully, pouring coffee into my late husband's navy mug, "that maybe it's time to discuss your living situation. 8 months seems a bit long for temporary, don't you think?" Joshua shifted uncomfortably at the kitchen island. "Mom, we're trying. The job market is tough right now." "The job market might be tough, but Emma's credit card doesn't seem to be struggling," I replied, nodding toward the shopping bags that had appeared in my living room yesterday. Designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. That's when Emma looked up from her phone and delivered the line that would change everything. "Kimberly, if you don't like living with us, you're free to leave any time." The audacity took my breath away. In my own house, standing next to the refrigerator I'd bought and paid for, eating food I'd purchased with my pension. Joshua said nothing, just stared at his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. My own son, watching his wife kick his mother out of her own home. Let me back up and explain how we got here. Richard and I had bought this house in Maple Heights 32 years ago when Joshua was just 10. We'd saved every penny, worked extra jobs, and finally achieved our dream home with a garden where I could grow tomatoes and a study where Richard could read his history books. When Richard died of a heart attack 2 years ago, I was devastated but financially secure. He'd been meticulous about our retirement planning, leaving me with a paid-off house and a comfortable pension. Not wealthy by any means, but stable. Then Joshua lost his job. He'd been a junior accountant at Peterson & Mills for 5 years. Good salary, nice benefits. Emma worked part-time at an upscale salon, though her main occupation seemed to be spending money they didn't have. "We just need a few weeks to regroup," Joshua had promised, hugging me on my doorstep that rainy March evening. "We'll help around the house, chip in for groceries." Those few weeks stretched into a month, then 2, then 8. The groceries they bought? I could count those occasions on one hand. The utilities they helped with? $0. The rent they paid? Not a cent. Meanwhile, Emma's online shopping addiction continued unabated. Packages arrived daily. Designer purses, expensive shoes, makeup from brands I couldn't pronounce. Joshua's contribution to the household was occasionally taking out the trash and constantly raiding my refrigerator. "I'm job hunting, Mom," he'd say, laptop open on the couch, though the screen usually displayed fantasy football stats rather than job applications. The breaking point came last week when I discovered they'd taken a vacation to Cancun. My credit card statement showed 3 nights at an all-inclusive resort, charged to the emergency card I'd given Joshua when they moved in. They hadn't even asked. "It was our anniversary," Emma explained with a dismissive wave when I confronted them. "We needed to celebrate 5 years together. Celebrate with my money, without my permission. In my house where they lived rent-free." So there I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, staring at Emma's cold eyes as she suggested I leave my own home. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me," Emma replied, scrolling through her phone. Nobody's forcing you to stay here if we're such a burden. Joshua shifted uncomfortably. Emma, that's not— What, Josh? Your mother clearly has issues with our arrangement. I'm just saying she has options. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to remind his wife whose name was on the deed to this house. Instead, he mumbled something about needing to check his emails and left the kitchen. Something inside me shifted in that moment. The old Kimberly would have apologized, maybe even started looking at senior living brochures. But this Kimberly, the one who'd survived losing her husband, who'd taught unruly teenagers for 4 decades, who'd paid off this house with years of hard work, this Kimberly had been pushed too far. You know what, Emma? You're absolutely right. She looked up, surprised by my calm tone. I do have options, I continued, setting down my coffee mug, and I think it's time I exercise them. I walked upstairs to the guest bedroom where they'd been staying, the room my husband and I had once imagined would hold grandchildren during visits, not adult parasites. I pulled their largest suitcase from the closet and unzipped it, the sound echoing in the quiet house. Emma appeared in the doorway. What are you doing? Packing, I said calmly, placing her designer clothes into the suitcase, the cashmere sweaters she wore once before declaring them last season, the jeans that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Those are my things. She stepped into the room, face flushing. Yes, they are, I agreed, adding Joshua's collection of expensive electronics to the pile. And you'll be taking them with you when you leave. Emma's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up. Leave? We're not leaving. Oh, but you are. I continued packing methodically. This is my house, Emma. My name is on the deed, and I'm asking you to find another place to live. Her face went from pink to red to purple in the span of seconds. Without a word, she pulled out her phone and started dialing frantically. Yes, I need police and an ambulance, she said, her voice suddenly shaky and tearful. My mother-in-law is having some kind of breakdown. She's acting completely erratic, and I'm scared for everyone's safety. I almost laughed at the performance. Mother-in-law? Since when was I family to her? She's threatening us and packing our belongings, Emma continued, dabbing at non-existent tears. I think she might be having a psychotic episode. I kept packing, amazed at how calm I felt. Let her call whoever she wanted. This was still my house. What I didn't know was that Emma had been planning this moment for months. 7 minutes after Emma's dramatic phone call, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see 2 police officers and a paramedic standing on my porch. Behind them was a black sedan I didn't recognize. Mrs. Davis, the older officer said politely when I opened the door. We received a call about a disturbance. Please come in, I said, stepping aside. Though I'm not sure what disturbance they're referring to. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her face streaked with what looked like genuine tears. Officers, thank God you're here. She just started throwing our things around, shouting about how we don't belong here. I've never seen her like this. The younger officer looked between us. Ma'am, is this your residence? Yes, it is, I replied calmly. I've lived here for 32 years. And you, miss? I'm Emma Davis, Joshua's wife, she said, descending the stairs with theatrical caution. Joshua is Kimberly's son. We've been staying here to help take care of her since her husband died. Help take care of me? I nearly choked. The woman who couldn't remember to put her dishes in the dishwasher was taking care of me? Mrs. Davis, the older officer said gently, your daughter-in-law says you were packing their belongings and asked them to leave. Can you tell us what happened? Certainly. I gestured toward the living room, inviting them to sit. Emma told me that if I didn't like living with them, I was free to leave. Since this is my house, I suggested they might be the ones who should leave instead. The paramedic stepped forward. He was young, probably fresh out of training. Mrs. Davis, I'm going to ask you a few questions just to make sure you're feeling okay. Can you tell me what day it is? Tuesday, September 17th. It's 10:45 in the morning, and I'm feeling perfectly fine, thank you. Do you know who the president is? I rattled off the current president's name, my address, my social security number, and even recited the opening lines of the Canterbury Tales in Middle English for good measure. The paramedic looked confused. "She seems completely lucid," he said to the officers. That's when the man from the black sedan appeared in my doorway. He was tall, silver-haired, and wore an expensive suit that screamed private practice. "Officers, I'm Dr. Nathan Scott. I'm a psychiatrist, and Mrs. Davis has been one of my patients." I stared at him. "I beg your pardon. I've never seen you before in my life." "Kimberly," Dr. Scott said in that condescending tone medical professionals use on difficult elderly patients. "You came to see me last month about your memory issues and paranoid thoughts about your family. That was impossible. I don't have memory issues, and I've never seen this man before." "Mom," Joshua had appeared from somewhere, his face a mask of concern. "You don't remember? You've been so confused lately." Confused? I felt like I'd stepped into a bizarre alternate reality. The only thing confusing me right now is why a doctor I've never met is standing in my living room claiming I'm his patient. Dr. Scott nodded sagely. This kind of angry denial is very common with dementia patients. They often accuse family members of theft or conspiracy. "I do not have dementia." "Mrs. Davis," the older officer said carefully, "would you mind if we took a look around just to make sure everything's okay?" Of course. I led them through my home, the living room where Emma's magazines were scattered across my coffee table, the kitchen where their dirty dishes sat in my sink, my home office where Joshua had been using my computer to play online poker. In the guest room, their belongings were indeed scattered across the floor where I'd been packing them. To someone who didn't know the context, it might have looked like the actions of someone having a breakdown. Dr. Scott examined the scene with theatrical concern. "Kimberly, can you explain why you were packing these items?" "Because Emma told me if I didn't like living with them, I could leave. I was simply taking her advice and helping them pack instead." "But these aren't your belongings to pack," he said gently. "They're in my house," I replied. "They've been here 8 months without paying rent." Emma sobbed louder. "She's been getting more and more agitated about money. Yesterday she accused us of not contributing, even though we pay for groceries all the time." I wanted to ask her to produce a single receipt, but something in Dr. Scott's eyes warned me that anything I said would be used as evidence of my deteriorating mental state. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous response to my packing their things. This was planned. "Mrs. Davis, we'd like you to come with us to the hospital," Dr. Scott said, his voice dripping with false compassion. "Just for observation, a few tests to make sure you're okay." "And if I refuse?" "Well," the older officer interjected, "we can't force you, but Dr. Scott here has some concerns about your mental state." I looked around my living room at the assembled cast of my apparent breakdown, Emma clutching tissues, Joshua hovering uselessly in the background, 2 cops who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, a paramedic checking his watch, and a psychiatrist I'd never met claiming to be my doctor. "You know what? I'll go to the hospital, but I want to call my attorney first." "Kimberly," Emma said quickly, "you don't need an attorney. We're family. We just want you to get better." Family. Right. The same family that had been living in my house rent-free while telling me I could leave if I didn't like it. I picked up my phone and dialed Vanessa Wu, my lawyer who'd handled Richard's estate. She answered on the second ring. "Vanessa, it's Kimberly Davis. I need you to meet me at Maple Heights General. Apparently I'm having a psychiatric evaluation." "What?" "Kimberly, what's going on?" "I'll explain when you get there." I hung up before anyone could object. Dr. Scott frowned. "Mrs. Davis, involving lawyers at this stage might complicate things unnecessarily." "Doctor, since I've never met you before and you're not actually my physician, I think having legal representation is perfectly reasonable." The younger cop looked confused. "Wait, if she's never met you, how are you her doctor?" Dr. Scott's smooth facade cracked slightly. "Mrs. Davis is clearly confused about our previous sessions." When exactly did these sessions take place? I asked sweetly. Patient confidentiality prevents me from, "Oh, you can discuss my supposed memory issues and paranoid thoughts in front of the police, but you can't tell me when I supposedly visited your office?" Emma stepped forward quickly. "Mom, you don't remember because of the confusion. That's why Dr. Scott is here to help." "Emma, in 30 years of marriage to Richard, I never once had memory issues. I balanced our checkbook, managed my classroom of 30 teenagers, and could tell you every birthday and anniversary in the family. But somehow in the 8 months since you moved in, I've developed sudden onset dementia." The older officer was starting to look skeptical. "Dr. Scott, do you have documentation of your previous treatment of Mrs. Davis?" "The records are at my office," he said stiffly. "Which office?" I asked. "What's your practice called? Where is it located?" Another crack in the facade. I don't think this hostile interrogation is helpful for the patient's mental state. "Hostile interrogation?" I laughed. "Officer, I'm asking a man who claims to be my doctor to provide basic information about his practice. If that's hostile, then I guess I really am losing my mind." Emma was looking nervous now, glancing between Dr. Scott and the police officers. "Can we just get her to the hospital? She clearly needs help." That's when Vanessa Wu arrived. She swept through my front door like an avenging angel in a navy blue suit, her briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other. "Which one of you is Dr. Scott?" she asked without preamble. The silver-haired man stepped forward. "I am. And you are?" "Vanessa Wu, Mrs. Davis's attorney. I just called the state medical board. Funny thing about Dr. Nathan Scott. He had his license suspended 6 months ago for participating in fraudulent psychiatric holds." The room went dead silent. "That's impossible," Emma whispered. "Oh, it's very possible. Dr. Scott here, or should I say Nathan Blackwell, has quite the reputation for helping families commit elderly relatives against their will, usually for a substantial fee." Dr. Scott was already backing toward the door. "There's been some misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Vanessa said coldly, "is thinking you could run this scam in my client's house." The older police officer's hand moved to his radio. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right where you are." Nathan Blackwell, no longer pretending to be Dr. Scott, made a dash for the door. The younger officer caught him by the arm, and within minutes he was being led away in handcuffs. The paramedic, who had been silent through most of this, looked embarrassed. "Mrs. Davis, I am so sorry. We had no idea." "It's not your fault," I said, though my hands were shaking. "You were responding to what you thought was a legitimate call." The older officer turned to Emma, who had gone pale. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Mr. Blackwell." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her eyes darting around the room. "I've never met that man before. He must have shown up when I called for help." Joshua, who had been watching the whole scene unfold in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Emma, what's going on?" "Nothing." Her voice rose an octave. "Your mother is confused, and now she's gotten everyone else confused, too." Vanessa Wu smiled thinly. "Mrs. Davis, while the officers are speaking with your daughter-in-law, perhaps we should go into the kitchen and have a chat." I followed my attorney into the kitchen, legs still wobbly from the adrenaline. Once we were alone, she pulled out her iPad and opened a file. "Kimberly, how well do you know your daughter-in-law?" "Apparently not well enough," I said, filling the kettle for tea. Something told me we'd need it. "I had my investigator do some digging after you called. Emma Davis, née Parker, has a very interesting history." As Vanessa spoke, my world tilted on its axis. The woman my son had married, the woman who had been living in my house for 8 months, was not who any of us thought she was. Before she married Joshua, she went by Emily Parker, Emily Martinez, and Emily Thompson. 3 different names? 3 different marriages, all to older wealthy men who died under questionable circumstances. The kettle whistled, but I barely heard it. "What are you saying, Vanessa?" "I'm saying that your daughter-in-law is a con artist who specializes in targeting vulnerable elderly people for their money and assets." I sank into a kitchen chair. But Joshua is only 42. He's not elderly. No, Vanessa said grimly, but his mother is 67, recently widowed, and owns a valuable home outright. The pieces clicked into terrible place. Emma hadn't married Joshua for love. She'd married him to get to me. The police spent 3 hours at my house that day. They interviewed Emma separately, then Joshua, then me. They took photos of the guest room, the living room, and the kitchen. They collected Nathan Blackwell's business card and a folder of documents Emma had ready, papers about elder care options that would have transferred guardianship of me and my assets to her and Joshua. When they finally left, taking Nathan Blackwell with them, the house felt eerily quiet. Joshua sat on the couch, head in his hands, while Emma paced nervously by the stairs. "We need to talk," I said, sitting in Richard's old armchair. Vanessa Wu had left as well, but not before giving me a file with everything her investigator had discovered about Emma. "There's nothing to talk about," Emma said quickly. "That doctor was obviously a fraud, but that has nothing to do with me or Josh." "Then why did you call him?" I asked, opening the file on my lap. "And why do your phone records show 3 calls to his number in the past 2 weeks?" Emma's face went white. "You're having me investigated? That's insane." "Is it?" I turned to the next page. "Is it also insane that before you were Emma Davis, you were Emily Parker, married to Robert Parker, age 72, who died of a heart attack 6 months after your wedding, leaving you his condo in Florida?" Joshua looked up. "Emma? Or that after that you were Emily Martinez, married to Carlos Martinez, age 68, who fell down a flight of stairs 8 months into your marriage and left you his investment portfolio?" Emma's pacing stopped. She stood frozen in my living room. "Or that your third husband, William Thompson, age 75, signed over his assets to you 3 weeks before he drowned in his swimming pool?" "Mom, what are you saying?" Joshua's voice was barely audible. "I'm saying that your wife has been married 3 times before, all to elderly men who died and left her their money. And now she's married to you, living in my house, and trying to have me committed to a psychiatric facility." Emma's demeanor changed completely. The frightened, concerned daughter-in-law act vanished, replaced by something cold and calculated. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "You want to know the truth? Those old men were pathetic, lonely, desperate, eager to throw money at any woman who paid attention to them. They got exactly what they paid for." Joshua took a step back from her. "Emma, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your mother is right. I married old rich men who died conveniently and left me their money. And yes, I was planning to do the same thing to her." The casual confession hit the room like a bomb. I'd suspected it, had the evidence right in front of me, but hearing her admit it was still shocking. "But here's what your precious mother doesn't understand," Emma continued, her mask completely off now. "I don't need Joshua anymore. I already transferred half her retirement account to my personal account last month." My blood went cold. "What?" Emma smiled for the first time since the police left. "Amazing what you can accomplish with someone's signature when you bring them their morning coffee every day. A little something in the coffee to make them drowsy and compliant. A few documents to sign. And voila. You've been drugging me." The pieces clicked into place. The unexplained fatigue I'd been experiencing. The mornings when I'd wake up groggy with no memory of the previous evening. The documents I'd supposedly signed but couldn't remember. Joshua was backing away from her, horror written across his face. "Emma, you drugged my mother?" "Oh, don't act so shocked, Joshua. You were happy enough to spend the money I transferred from her accounts. That vacation to Cancun, the new gaming equipment, the designer clothes I bought you. Where did you think the money was coming from? I thought you were working. I thought the salon job—" "Paid minimum wage plus tips? Really, Joshua? You're even more naive than your mother." Vanessa had warned me to keep recording, so my phone was still capturing every word of this conversation. Emma didn't seem to care anymore. "You know what?" she said, heading for the stairs. "I'm done with this family drama. I've got enough of your money to start over somewhere else." "Actually, Emma," I said, standing up from my chair, I need you to know that the FBI has frozen all bank accounts associated with your social security number as of an hour ago. Her confidence faltered. You can't do that. I didn't, but when someone is suspected of serial elder fraud across multiple states, the federal government can do quite a lot. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see black SUVs lining my street. That would be Agent Sarah Mitchell, I said. Vanessa called her after we discovered your pattern of targeting elderly people. They're very interested in talking to you about your previous husbands. Emma's face contorted with rage. You set me up. No, Emma, I said, walking to the door. I protected myself. There's a difference. The FBI agents were professional and efficient. Agent Sarah Mitchell, a woman about my age with steel gray hair and piercing eyes, took Emma into custody while explaining her rights. The irony wasn't lost on me that Emma was being read the same rights she'd tried to strip away from me. Mrs. Davis, Agent Mitchell said after Emma had been escorted to one of the black SUVs, we're going to need you to come to the field office tomorrow to give a formal statement, but I want you to know how brave you were to come forward. I didn't come forward, I said, still watching the vehicle that held my daughter-in-law. I was just trying to keep them from kicking me out of my own house. Agent Mitchell smiled. Sometimes the bravest thing we do is simply refuse to be victims. She handed me her card. We'll be in touch about recovering your stolen assets. In the meantime, is there someone who can stay with you tonight? Joshua stepped forward. He hadn't spoken since Emma's shocking confession. I'll stay with her. Agent Mitchell gave him a measured look. And you are? Joshua Davis. I'm Kimberly's son. His voice was hollow. Were you aware of your wife's activities, Mr. Davis? He shook his head. No, I had no idea about any of it. Her past marriages, drugging my mother, stealing from the retirement accounts. None of it. The agent nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. We'll need to interview you as well. After the agents left, Joshua and I sat in my living room in uncomfortable silence. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, despite the physical evidence of Emma's presence still scattered around us. Her magazines on the coffee table, her perfume lingering in the air. Mom, Joshua finally said, his voice breaking. I didn't know about any of it. I swear to you. I studied his face, looking for the truth. My son had always been a terrible liar. His ears would turn red, just like when he was a little boy trying to convince me he hadn't eaten the cookies before dinner. But you knew she was disrespectful to me, I said quietly. You heard her tell me to leave my own house, and you said nothing. He nodded miserably. You're right. I was weak. I was so grateful that someone like Emma wanted to be with me after I lost my job. I didn't want to rock the boat. Even if it meant watching your mother be humiliated in her own home? Tears welled in his eyes. I have no excuse. I chose a woman who was planning to rob my mother over being the son who protected you. He looked up at me. Can you ever forgive me? I reached over and took his hand. Joshua, you're my son. I love you. But you need to understand that respect isn't optional. Not in my house. Not in my life. I understand. He squeezed my hand. And Mom, I'm going to find my own place. You deserve to have your house back. One thing at a time, I said, feeling the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. First, we need to figure out how much money Emma stole and get it back. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already decided what I was going to do once we recovered the money. Emma Davis thought she could prey on vulnerable seniors with impunity. She was about to learn how wrong she was. 3 weeks after Emma's arrest, I was sitting in Agent Mitchell's office at the FBI field office, staring at a number that made my head spin. She stole $347,000 from you over 8 months, Agent Mitchell said, sliding bank statements across her desk. But here's what's interesting. She only spent about $60,000 of it. Where's the rest? I leaned forward, trying to make sense of the transactions on the papers in front of me. That's what we're trying to figure out. We believe Emma was part of a larger operation. Your case may be just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. I sat back in the uncomfortable government-issued chair. How much bigger? Agent Mitchell pulled out a thick file. We've identified at least 15 other victims across 6 states. All elderly, all targeted using the same approach. Fake psychiatric holds, fraudulent power of attorney documents, forged signatures. 15 people like me, I whispered. 15 people who weren't as lucky as you, she corrected. Most of them are now in nursing homes, declared incompetent by courts, their assets controlled by loving family members who are actually part of this network. The scope was staggering. I thought of myself sitting in my kitchen that morning, facing down Emma and her cold eyes. How close had I come to becoming one of those statistics? Was Emma working with other people? Emma, Nathan Blackwell, at least 3 other fake doctors, several corrupt lawyers, and what appears to be a placement coordinator who identifies potential targets. Placement coordinator? The term sounded so clinical, so detached from the human damage these people caused. Agent Mitchell opened another file. Someone who works in healthcare or senior services who identifies wealthy elderly people who are isolated or vulnerable and passes their information to the team. I thought about how easily Emma had walked into my life through Joshua. Had we been targeted specifically? How did they find me? We're still investigating that, but Mrs. Davis, we need your help. What kind of help? The other victims can't testify. They've been declared mentally incompetent, or they're too scared, or they've been convinced by their captors that they're actually sick. Agent Mitchell leaned forward. You're the only victim who fought back successfully. We need you to help us catch the rest of them. There's someone at the top of this operation we haven't identified yet, she continued. Someone who's been running this scam for at least 5 years. I thought about those 15 other people trapped in nursing homes. Their families probably told they were getting the best care while their life savings disappeared into criminal accounts. What would I need to do? The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Agent Mitchell explained it over coffee in my kitchen 3 days later, with Joshua listening in shocked silence. We'll leak information that you've recovered your stolen money and are looking to invest it safely. We'll monitor the phones and digital communications of everyone in Emma's network who hasn't been arrested yet. The idea is that someone will approach you with a new investment opportunity or financial service, she continued. Someone trustworthy, probably recommended by a friend or through your church or community center. And then we see how deep this rabbit hole goes, I finished for her. Joshua shook his head. Mom, this sounds dangerous. What if something goes wrong? I patted his hand. Honey, something already went wrong. Your wife tried to have me committed and steal my life savings. At this point, danger is relative. Agent Mitchell smiled. Mrs. Davis will be completely protected. We'll have agents nearby at all times, and she'll be wearing recording equipment. Plus, we think the approach will be subtle at first. These people are patient predators. They were right about that. It took exactly 6 days. I was at the grocery store Thursday morning when a woman approached me in the cereal aisle. She was about my age, well-dressed, with the kind of professional appearance that screamed trustworthy. "Excuse me?" she said with a warm smile. "Aren't you Kimberly Davis? I'm Helen Curtis. I think our daughters went to high school together." I didn't recognize her, but I smiled politely. "Nice to meet you, Helen. I hate to bother you, but I couldn't help overhearing you talking to the pharmacist about managing your retirement funds. I just went through something similar after my husband passed." My radar immediately went up. I hadn't been talking to the pharmacist about my finances. "Oh, yes?" I kept my voice casual while my heart raced. The wire taped to my ribs suddenly felt very obvious. "And I found the most wonderful financial advisor. He specializes in helping widows protect their assets from family members who might take advantage." There it was, the hook delivered with perfect timing and false sympathy. "That's very kind of you to mention," I said carefully. Helen handed me a business card. "His name is Robert Davidson. He's helped so many of us ladies in similar situations. Very discreet, very professional." After she walked away, I immediately texted Agent Mitchell the details. Her response came back quickly. Perfect. We know Robert Davidson. He's been on our radar for months. 2 days later, Robert Davidson called me. He had the smoothest voice I'd heard since my high school drama teacher. Warm, reassuring, with just a hint of concern that made you want to trust him immediately. Mrs. Davis, Helen Curtis suggested I reach out to you. She mentioned you might be interested in exploring some secure investment options. I might be, I said, settling into my kitchen chair while Agent Mitchell monitored from the van parked across the street. Though I have to admit I'm a bit wary these days. I recently had some trouble with someone trying to take advantage of my finances. Oh my. Robert's voice oozed sympathy. Unfortunately, that's far too common. Elder financial abuse is epidemic, particularly from family members who feel entitled to their parents' assets. He was good. Really good. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee? I have an office in downtown Maple Heights. Very comfortable, very private. I specialize in helping seniors protect their wealth from predatory family members. We arranged to meet the following Tuesday at his office. Agent Mitchell briefed me thoroughly beforehand. Robert Davidson is sophisticated, she warned. He's been doing this for at least 3 years. His approach is usually a legitimate-seeming investment that requires signing over temporary power of attorney for processing purposes. And then you disappear into the system. Fake medical emergency, fake psychiatric evaluation, fake diagnosis of incompetence. By the time your real family figures out what happened, your assets are gone, and you're in a locked facility somewhere. How many people has he done this to? We think at least 20. But Mrs. Davis, this meeting is our chance to get him on tape discussing the scam. The microphones built into your purse will catch everything. Robert Davidson's office was everything you'd expect from a legitimate financial advisor. Expensive furniture, diplomas on the walls, family photos on his desk. If I hadn't known what I was looking for, I would have trusted him completely. Mrs. Davis, thank you so much for coming in. Helen Curtis spoke very highly of you. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 55, with silver hair and grandfatherly eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of man you'd trust to walk your dog or help you change a tire. Helen seems lovely, I said, taking the seat across from his desk. She's one of my success stories, actually. When we first met, her stepchildren were trying to have her declared incompetent so they could access her late husband's estate. Now her assets are completely protected. How did you manage that? I leaned forward with genuine curiosity. How did these people operate so successfully? Robert leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, Margaret, may I call you Kimberly? There are legal strategies available to seniors that most people don't know about. Ways to protect your assets that go beyond simple trusts or wills. Such as? I prompted. Well, there's a process where we can temporarily transfer your assets into a protective holding account while we establish what's called a senior asset shield. It's completely legal, but it has to be done correctly. Temporarily transfer my assets? I raised an eyebrow, making sure my skepticism would be captured by the recording. Just while the paperwork is processed. Usually takes about 2 weeks. During that time, your money is completely safe from any family members who might try to claim you're incompetent or unable to manage your affairs. I pretended to consider this. That sounds complicated. Not at all. I handle everything. You just sign a few documents giving me temporary authority to move your funds, and I take care of the rest. Helen went through the exact same process. And where exactly are my assets transferred to during this process? Robert's smile never wavered. A secure holding account managed by my firm, fully insured, completely safe. You'll get statements showing exactly where every penny is. I see. And what happens if something were to happen to me during those 2 weeks? If I had a medical emergency or something? Well, that's the beauty of the system. If you become incapacitated for any reason, the protective hold remains in place until you're able to manage your affairs again. Your family can't touch the money. Predatory relatives can't manipulate you into bad decisions. It's foolproof. I bet it was foolproof for him. Robert, I have to ask. This all sounds almost too good to be true. How do I know this isn't some kind of scam? His expression shifted to one of hurt surprise. Kimberly, I understand your concern. After what you've been through with your family situation, of course you're suspicious. But I've been helping seniors protect their assets for over a decade. I can provide references, testimonials, whatever you need to feel comfortable. I'd like to think about it, of course. Of course, but Kimberly, I have to tell you, based on what Helen mentioned about your recent troubles, time might be of the essence. If your family is already trying to challenge your competency, every day we wait gives them more opportunity to build a case against you. The perfect pressure tactic. Create urgency based on manufactured fear. How quickly could we do this if I decided to move forward? I could have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. The whole process could be completed by Friday. 4 days to steal my life savings and disappear me into the system. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision, I said, standing to leave. As I shook his hand goodbye, Robert Davidson smiled warmly. Kimberly, you're doing the right thing by being cautious. It shows you're exactly the kind of intelligent, careful person who deserves to have her assets protected. Walking to my car, I felt sick. This man was so convincing, so professional, so perfectly calibrated to exploit the fears of elderly people who'd already been victimized. But I also felt something else. Fury. Agent Mitchell was waiting in my kitchen when I got home from the meeting, along with 2 other agents I hadn't met before. The recording equipment had captured every word of my conversation with Robert Davidson. Excellent work, Mrs. Davis, Agent Mitchell said, pulling up the audio files on her laptop. He laid out the entire scam in detail. How many people do you think he's done this to? I asked, pouring coffee for everyone. Based on what we've learned from Emma's records, we think Robert Davidson is the placement coordinator for this entire operation. He identifies the targets, gains their trust, gets them to sign over power of attorney, then hands them off to the medical team. One of the new agents, a young man who looked like he should still be in college, leaned forward. Mrs. Davis, we think Davidson has been running this operation for at least 5 years. The money from all the victims gets funneled through his investment firm to accounts in the Cayman Islands. How much money are we talking about? Conservatively, about $12 million. I set my coffee cup down hard. $12 million stolen from elderly people, and that's just from the cases we know about. Agent Mitchell pulled out another file. Mrs. Davis, we want to move forward with the operation, but we need you to understand the risks. If Davidson suspects anything, if we move too fast, he could disappear. We might never catch him. What do you need me to do? Call him tomorrow and agree to the asset protection plan. We'll have agents positioned around his office and recording everything. When he has you sign the power of attorney documents, we'll have enough evidence to arrest him. And what about the people he's already victimized? The ones in nursing homes? Once we arrest Davidson and get access to his records, we can start the process of getting them released and their money returned. But it's going to take time. Some of them have been in the system for years. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Helen Curtis, who had approached me so smoothly in the grocery store. Was she a victim who'd been turned into a recruiter, or was she part of the operation from the beginning? I also thought about the 15 people Agent Mitchell had mentioned. 15 seniors sitting in nursing homes right now, probably being told by staff that their families didn't want to see them anymore, that they were too sick to manage their own affairs. 15 people who had no idea that their life savings had been stolen while they were being slowly drugged into compliance. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I got up and made a list of questions I wanted to ask Robert Davidson. If I was going to help bring down this operation, I was going to do it right. The next day, I called Davidson's office. Kimberly, I was hoping to hear from you. Have you made a decision about the asset protection plan? I have. I'd like to move forward. Wonderful. Can you come in this afternoon? I've already prepared all the necessary documents. Actually, Robert, I was wondering if we could meet somewhere more private. Your office felt a bit formal yesterday. Is there somewhere quieter we could go? There was a pause. Where did you have in mind? What about my house? I'd feel more comfortable reviewing financial documents in my own home. Another pause, longer this time. I suppose that would be acceptable. Would 309 work for you? Perfect. After I hung up, I called Agent Mitchell. He's coming to my house this afternoon. Even better. We can wire the entire house for sound and video. Mrs. Davis, by the end of today, we should have enough evidence to take down the entire network. At 2:45 that afternoon, I was sitting in my living room watching through the window as Robert Davidson pulled into my driveway. He carried a leather briefcase and looked exactly like what he was pretending to be, a trustworthy financial advisor making a house call to help an elderly client. What he didn't know was that FBI agents were positioned in 3 houses on my street, that my entire house was wired for audio and video, and that the little old lady he was planning to victimize had already figured out his game. I opened the door with my best grateful widow smile. Robert, thank you so much for coming to my house. This feels much more comfortable. Of course, Kimberly. I want you to feel completely at ease with this process. As I led him into my living room, I wondered how many other elderly people had heard those exact words just before signing away their freedom. But today was going to be different. Today, Robert Davidson was going to get a taste of his own medicine. Robert Davidson spread the documents across my coffee table with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Powers of attorney, asset transfer forms, medical directives, everything needed to steal a life. Now, Kimberly, I want you to understand exactly what each of these documents does, he said, his voice warm and reassuring. This first one gives me temporary authority to move your assets into the protective holding account. I picked up the power of attorney document and pretended to read it carefully. Robert, this language is quite broad. It says you have authority over all my financial and medical decisions. Only temporarily, and only for your protection. Once the asset shield is in place, the power of attorney becomes inactive. And when exactly does it become inactive? He hesitated for just a moment. Once I determine that your assets are fully protected from any potential threats. I see. And who determines when that is? Well, I do, based on my professional assessment of your situation. I set the document down. So essentially, you decide when to give me back control of my own money. Robert's smile flickered slightly. Kimberly, I understand your concern, but you have to trust the process. This is exactly how we protected Helen Curtis's assets. Speaking of Helen, I'd love to talk to her about her experience. Could you give me her phone number? I'm afraid I can't share client contact information. Confidentiality, you understand. Of course, but surely she wouldn't mind me calling her. After all, she's the one who recommended you. Robert was looking uncomfortable now. Perhaps we could arrange for her to call you after we complete the paperwork. Why not before? He stopped, clearly realizing he was painting himself into a corner. Kimberly, I sense some hesitation on your part. Is there something specific that's concerning you? I leaned back in my chair and looked at him carefully. This man who made his living by destroying elderly people's lives. This predator who had perfected the art of seeming trustworthy while planning betrayal. Robert, I'm curious about something. How did Helen Curtis know I was talking to the pharmacist about my finances? His face went blank. I'm sorry? When she approached me at the grocery store, she said she overheard me discussing retirement funds with the pharmacist, but I never had that conversation. Perhaps you forgot. Robert, I'm 67 years old, not 97. My memory is perfect. So how did Helen know to approach me? The friendly mask was slipping now. Kimberly, I think you're overthinking this. Am I? Because I'm also curious about something else. You said you've been helping seniors for over a decade, but your business license was only filed 3 years ago. Robert started gathering up the documents. I think perhaps this isn't the right time for you to make these kinds of financial decisions. Actually, I think this is the perfect time. I stood up and walked to my window. Robert, do you see that van parked across the street? He turned to look, and I saw his face go pale. That's FBI agent Sarah Mitchell. She's been listening to our entire conversation. Robert was on his feet now, stuffing papers into his briefcase. This is entrapment. No, Robert. Entrapment is what you do to elderly people. This is justice. He was moving toward the door when it opened, and Agent Mitchell walked in, followed by 2 other agents. Robert Davidson, you're under arrest for elder fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. As they read him his rights and led him away in handcuffs, Robert looked back at me with pure hatred in his eyes. You have no idea what you've done, he said. This is bigger than you think. Agent Mitchell closed the door behind them and turned to me with a smile. Mrs. Davis, we couldn't have done this without you. What happens now? Now we use the information from Davidson's records to locate all the victims and start getting them released, and we follow the money trail to see how high this goes. 2 hours later, Agent Mitchell called me with news that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Davis, we've been going through Davidson's files. This operation isn't just regional, it's national. And the person at the top, she paused. You're not going to believe this. Who is it? Davidson's been reporting to someone called the Coordinator. Based on the communication patterns and financial flows, we think the Coordinator has been running similar operations in at least 15 states. How much money? We're estimating over $50 million stolen from elderly victims over the past 8 years. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. $50 million. Mrs. Davis, you didn't just help us catch a small-time scammer. You helped us uncover what might be the largest elder fraud operation in U.S. history. But the biggest shock was still coming. At 2:45 that afternoon, I watched through my living room window as Robert Davidson's silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. He emerged carrying a leather briefcase, looking every bit the trustworthy financial advisor making a house call to help an elderly client. His silver hair caught the autumn sunlight, and his wire-rimmed glasses gave him that grandfatherly appearance that instinctively made you want to trust him. What he didn't know was that FBI agents were positioned in 3 houses on my street, that my entire house was wired for audio and video, and that the little old lady he was planning to victimize had already figured out his game. I opened the door with my best grateful widow smile. Robert, thank you so much for coming to my house. This feels much more comfortable. Of course, Kimberly. His smile was practiced perfection. I want you to feel completely at ease with this process. As I led him into my living room, I wondered how many other elderly people had heard those exact words just before signing away their freedom. But today was going to be different. Today, Robert Davidson was going to get a taste of his own medicine. Would you like some coffee or tea? I asked, gesturing toward the couch. Coffee would be lovely, thank you. He sat down, placing his briefcase on my coffee table. In the kitchen, I took a moment to steady my nerves. Agent Mitchell had assured me that every word was being recorded, that agents were watching the house, that I was completely safe. Still, knowing I was sitting across from a man who had helped rob and institutionalize at least 20 seniors made my hands shake as I prepared the coffee. When I returned with 2 mugs, Davidson had already spread several documents across my coffee table. Powers of attorney, asset transfer forms, medical directives, everything needed to steal a life. Now, Kimberly, he began, his voice warm and reassuring. I want you to understand exactly what each of these documents does. This first one gives me temporary authority to move your assets into the protective holding account. I picked up the power of attorney document and pretended to read it carefully. Robert, this language is quite broad. It says you have authority over all my financial and medical decisions. Only temporarily and only for your protection. He pointed to a paragraph on the second page. Once the asset shield is in place, the power of attorney becomes inactive. And when exactly does it become inactive? He hesitated for just a moment. Once I determine that your assets are fully protected from any potential threats. I see. And who determines when that is? Well, I do, based on my professional assessment of your situation. I set the document down. So essentially, you decide when to give me back control of my own money. Robert's smile flickered slightly. Kimberly, I understand your concern, but you have to trust the process. This is exactly how we protected Helen Curtis's assets. Speaking of Helen, I'd love to talk to her about her experience. Could you give me her phone number? I'm afraid I can't share client contact information. Confidentiality, you understand. Of course, but surely she wouldn't mind me calling her. After all, she's the one who recommended you. Robert was looking uncomfortable now. Perhaps we could arrange for her to call you after we complete the paperwork. Why not before? He stopped, clearly realizing he was painting himself into a corner. Kimberly, I sense some hesitation on your part. Is there something specific that's concerning you? I leaned back in my chair and looked at him carefully. This man who made his living by destroying elderly people's lives. This predator who had perfected the art of seeming trustworthy while planning betrayal. Robert, I'm curious about something. How did Helen Curtis know I was talking to the pharmacist about my finances? His face went blank. I'm sorry? When she approached me at the grocery store, she said she overheard me discussing retirement funds with the pharmacist, but I never had that conversation. Perhaps you forgot. Robert, I'm 67 years old, not 97. My memory is perfect. So how did Helen know to approach me? The friendly mask was slipping now. Kimberly, I think you're overthinking this. Am I? Because I'm also curious about something else. You said you've been helping seniors for over a decade, but your business license was only filed 3 years ago. Robert started gathering up the documents. I think perhaps this isn't the right time for you to make these kinds of financial decisions. Actually, I think this is the perfect time. I stood up and walked to my window. Robert, do you see that van parked across the street? He turned to look, and I saw his face go pale. That's FBI agent Sarah Mitchell. She's been listening to our entire conversation. Robert was on his feet now, stuffing papers into his briefcase. This is entrapment. No, Robert. Entrapment is what you do to elderly people. This is justice. He was moving toward the door when it opened, and Agent Mitchell walked in, followed by 2 other agents. Robert Davidson, you're under arrest for elder fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. As they read him his rights and led him away in handcuffs, Robert looked back at me with pure hatred in his eyes. You have no idea what you've done, he said. This is bigger than you think. Agent Mitchell closed the door behind them and turned to me with a smile. Mrs. Davis, we couldn't have done this without you. What happens now? Now we use the information from Davidson's records to locate all the victims and start getting them released. And we follow the money trail to see how high this goes. 2 hours later, Agent Mitchell called me with news that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Davis, we've been going through Davidson's files. This operation isn't just regional, it's national. And the person at the top, she paused. You're not going to believe this. Who is it? Davidson's been reporting to someone called the coordinator. Based on the communication patterns and financial flows, we think the coordinator has been running similar operations in at least 15 states. How much money? We're estimating over $50 million stolen from elderly victims over the past 8 years. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. $50 million? Mrs. Davis, you didn't just help us catch a small-time scammer. You helped us uncover what might be the largest elder fraud operation in U.S. history. But the biggest shock was still coming. Agent Mitchell arrived at my house the next morning with news that changed everything I thought I knew about the case. Mrs. Davis, we've identified the coordinator, she said, setting a file on my kitchen table. And you're going to want to sit down for this. I poured coffee and settled into my chair. Who is it? She opened the file and pulled out a photograph, a professional headshot of a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and kind eyes. I stared at the picture, confusion flooding through me. I don't understand. Who is this? Dr. Melissa Kellerman. She's been running the entire operation from a senior care consulting firm in Chicago. Kellerman? As in Nathan Blackwell? The fake psychiatrist? Her brother. But here's the part that's going to shock you. Agent Mitchell leaned forward. Dr. Melissa Kellerman is a real doctor. She's a licensed geriatrician who's been using her position in the medical community to identify and target victims. I studied the photograph more carefully. Something about the woman's face seemed familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have seen her. She uses her medical practice to identify elderly patients who are wealthy and isolated, Agent Mitchell continued. Then she refers them to what she calls specialized elder care coordinators, people like Robert Davidson. And her patients trust her because she's a real doctor. Exactly. Over the past 8 years, she's built a network of fake financial advisors, corrupt lawyers, and fraudulent medical professionals across 15 states. They've stolen over $50 million and placed more than 200 elderly people in secured facilities against their will. The scope of it was staggering. 200 people. We started making arrests across the country yesterday. We've recovered 37 victims so far, and we're working to locate the rest. Agent Mitchell pulled out another document. Mrs. Davis, there's something else. We found your name in Dr. Kellerman's files. My blood went cold. What do you mean? You were targeted 18 months ago, long before Emma came into your life. She handed me a folder with my name on it. Inside were copies of my medical records, financial statements, property records, even photographs of my house. How did she get all this? We're still investigating, but we think someone in your medical provider's office was feeding information to Dr. Kellerman's network. I thought back to my annual physical 18 months ago, the routine blood work and screening tests. Had someone in my doctor's office been passing my information to these criminals? Mrs. Davis, Emma didn't find your family by accident. She was directed to your son, Joshua, specifically because Dr. Kellerman's research showed you were the perfect target. What do you mean, perfect target? Agent Mitchell flipped through the file. Wealthy widow, adult children who live far away, no close family nearby, good health but getting older. You checked every box on their victim profile. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Joshua didn't meet Emma at a coffee shop. She sought him out. We think so. Emma's previous marriages all followed the same pattern. She would research wealthy elderly people, then target their adult children or grandchildren to gain access to the family. I thought about Joshua's whirlwind romance with Emma, how quickly they'd moved in together, how eager she'd been to meet me. I'd attributed it to young love, but it had been calculated predation from the beginning. There's more, Agent Mitchell said gently. Dr. Kellerman has been arrested in Chicago. When we searched her office, we found detailed plans for your case. You were going to be placed in a secured facility in Florida where you would have been kept sedated and isolated while they drained your accounts. For how long? Until you died or until the money ran out. The casual brutality of it took my breath away. And my son, what would they have told Joshua? That you were getting the best possible care for your dementia, and that visits weren't recommended because they agitated you. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the street where I'd lived for 32 years, the neighborhood where I'd raised Joshua, where I'd buried my husband, where I'd planned to grow old peacefully. Mrs. Davis, I want you to know that your actions didn't just save yourself. Because of what you did, we've been able to rescue dozens of other victims and shut down the largest elder fraud operation we've ever encountered. I turned back to Agent Mitchell. What happens to the money they stole? We're working to return as much as possible to the victims. In your case, we've recovered all of your funds plus interest. And the people who were placed in facilities? We're working with state authorities to get them released and reunited with their real families. It's going to take time, but we'll get them home. That afternoon, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, thinking about everything that had happened. 6 months ago, I'd been a lonely widow letting her son and his wife take advantage of her kindness. Today, I was a woman who had helped bring down a criminal empire. My phone rang. It was Joshua. Mom, I just saw the news. Dr. Kellerman's arrest is all over the television. I know. They're saying you helped the FBI catch the whole network. I did what needed to be done. There was a long pause. "Mom, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so sorry for everything Emma put you through, for everything I let her put you through. Joshua, you were a victim too. Emma manipulated you just like she tried to manipulate me. But you fought back. You refused to be a victim." I smiled, watching a cardinal land on my bird feeder. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a predator is refuse to be prey. 6 months later, I received a letter from the Department of Justice thanking me for my service in taking down the Kellerman network. The operation had rescued 187 elderly victims and recovered $42 million in stolen assets. But the real reward came 3 weeks after that, when a woman named Dorothy Miller called to thank me. She'd been one of Dr. Kellerman's victims, trapped in a facility in Nevada for 14 months while her assets were drained. "Mrs. Davis," she said, her voice strong and clear, "because of what you did, I'm back in my own home with my own family. You gave me my life back." That evening, sitting in my living room where Emma had once tried to convince police I was having a breakdown, I realized something important. I wasn't the same woman who had let her daughter-in-law walk all over her. I wasn't the grieving widow who had been too polite to stand up for herself. I was Kimberly Davis, 67 years old, and I was nobody's victim. When I first received the invitation to testify before the Senate Special Committee on Aging, I nearly declined. The thought of reliving my experience in such a public forum made my stomach twist. But then I thought about Dorothy Miller and the 186 other seniors who had been rescued from facilities across the country, and I knew I had to do it. "My name is Kimberly Davis," I began, adjusting the microphone in the hearing room. 8 months ago, my daughter-in-law tried to have me declared incompetent and committed to a psychiatric facility so she could steal my retirement savings and my home. The chamber was silent as I told my story, how Emma and Joshua had moved in temporarily, how Emma had drugged my morning coffee, how Nathan Blackwell had posed as my doctor, how Robert Davidson had tried to trick me into signing over power of attorney. "But this wasn't just about me," I continued. "I was one of hundreds of elderly Americans targeted by the Kellerman network. Most weren't as fortunate as I was. Most lost everything: their homes, their savings, their freedom, and in many cases contact with their families." I looked directly at the panel of senators. What happened to me could happen to any of you or your parents. The predators are sophisticated, patient, and they know exactly how to exploit the gaps in our legal system. I'm here today to ask you to close those gaps. My testimony led to the introduction of the Elder Protection Act, legislation designed to strengthen safeguards against fraudulent guardianships, increase penalties for elder financial abuse, and provide funding for a national elder fraud prevention and response network. But legislation takes time, and in the meantime, there were still victims who needed help. That's why I used a portion of my recovered funds to establish the Davis Foundation for Elder Justice. With Vanessa Wu's legal expertise and the help of volunteers, we began working to identify and assist other seniors who had been targeted by similar scams. Joshua supported my efforts wholeheartedly, using his accounting background to help victims recover stolen assets and rebuild their financial security. Working together allowed us to heal our relationship, which had been so damaged by Emma's manipulation. "Mom," he said one evening as we were going over the Foundation's books, "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything. If you hadn't fought back—" "But I did," I reminded him. "And now we're helping others fight back, too." 3 months after the Senate hearing, I received a call from Agent Mitchell. "Mrs. Davis, I thought you'd want to know. Emma's trial has been scheduled for next month. The prosecution wants to know if you're willing to testify." I didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." "There's something else. Emma is offering to provide additional information about the Kellerman network in exchange for a reduced sentence." "What kind of information?" "She claims there are other operations similar to Kellerman's that haven't been identified yet. Other coordinators who are still active." A chill ran down my spine. "Does the FBI believe her?" "We're investigating, but I wanted to give you a heads up that this case might be bigger than we initially thought." After I hung up, I sat in my living room, staring at the photograph of Richard on the mantel. What would he think of everything that had happened? Of what I'd done? I liked to believe he would be proud. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Dorothy Miller, carrying a homemade apple pie. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said, her gray hair neatly arranged in a bun. "I was in town visiting my daughter, and I wanted to thank you in person." We sat in my kitchen, sharing pie and stories about our experiences with the Kellerman Network. Dorothy had been a high school principal before retiring. She was sharp, witty, and still furious about what had been done to her. 14 months of my life in that place," she said, shaking her head. "Drugged so heavily I could barely remember my own name, all while my so-called caregiver, a woman I'd hired to help with housekeeping, emptied my bank accounts and sold my family heirlooms." "Did they ever find her?" I asked. "Yes, in Arizona. She was already setting up her next victim. But here's the thing, Kimberly. Even though the FBI has dismantled the Kellerman Network, there are others out there. Other predators looking at seniors and seeing dollar signs instead of human beings." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why I started the foundation." Dorothy's eyes lit up. "I've been reading about your work, and I want to help. After a career in education, I know a thing or two about organizing and mobilizing resources." By the time she left that evening, Dorothy had agreed to join the Davis Foundation as our education director, developing programs to help seniors recognize and avoid scams. It was the beginning of what would become a nationwide network of volunteers, many of them Kellerman survivors, dedicated to protecting vulnerable elderly people. Emma's trial was a media sensation. The story of a serial widow who targeted elderly victims captured the public imagination, and the courtroom was packed every day. I took the stand on the third day. Emma sat at the defense table, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing glasses I'd never seen before. Gone was the designer clothing and perfect makeup. This Emma looked like a quiet librarian, not a predator. "Missy Davis," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" For the next hour, I detailed Emma's entry into my life, the gradual escalation of her disrespect, the discovery of her drugging my coffee, the attempt to have me committed, and the theft of my retirement funds. Throughout my testimony, Emma stared at the table in front of her, never meeting my eyes. It was only when the prosecutor asked about her connection to Dr. Kellerman that she showed any reaction, a brief tightening of her jaw. "Mrs. Davis," Emma's defense attorney asked during cross-examination, "isn't it possible that you misunderstood my client's intentions, that she was genuinely concerned about your well-being?" "Is drugging someone's coffee a sign of genuine concern?" I replied. "Is stealing their retirement funds an act of care? Is trying to have them locked away in a facility against their will something a loving daughter-in-law would do?" The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Emma was found guilty on all counts: elder abuse, fraud, theft, conspiracy, and attempted false imprisonment. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison. As she was led away, Emma finally looked at me. There was no remorse in her eyes, only cold calculation. I realized then that she had never seen me as a person, only as a target, a resource to be exploited. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around me, shouting questions. "Mrs. Davis, how do you feel about the verdict?" "I feel relief," I said honestly. "Not just for myself, but for all the other victims who will be protected because Emma Davis can no longer harm them." "What's next for you?" "I'm continuing my work with the Davis Foundation for Elder Justice. We're expanding our programs to help seniors recognize and avoid scams, and to provide legal assistance to those who have been victimized." "Do you have a message for other seniors who might be in similar situations?" I thought carefully before answering. Yes, trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to demand answers, to seek help. And most importantly, Remember that your age doesn't diminish your worth or your right to be treated with respect. As I walked to my car, I noticed an elderly woman waiting nearby. She approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Davis? I'm Margaret Thompson. My son and daughter-in-law moved in with me 6 months ago. They keep saying it's temporary, but..." Her voice trailed off. I took her hand. "Margaret, would you like to come to the foundation office? I think we should talk." Margaret's situation wasn't identical to mine, but it was concerning enough that the foundation arranged for a social worker to check in regularly and helped Margaret establish clear boundaries with her son and daughter-in-law. It was the first of many such interventions, as seniors across the country began reaching out after seeing my story in the news. The Davis Foundation grew rapidly, opening offices in 5 states within the first year. We worked closely with law enforcement, social services, and elder law attorneys to identify potential cases of abuse and intervene before situations escalated. Joshua found his purpose in this work as well, using his accounting skills to help seniors manage their finances and recognize warning signs of fraud. The pain of his unwitting role in Emma's scheme never fully disappeared, but he channeled that guilt into positive action. 2 years after Emma's conviction, I received an unexpected call from Agent Mitchell. "Mrs. Davis, we've completed our investigation into the information Emma provided. She was telling the truth. We've identified 3 other networks similar to Kellerman's operating across the country." "Have you shut them down?" "We're in the process, but I'm calling because we need your help again. These operations are using new tactics to target seniors, and we'd like the Davis Foundation to help us develop educational materials warning people about these methods." I agreed immediately. The foundation had become my mission, my purpose in the years after Richard's death. Through this work, I'd found a community of survivors and advocates who were determined to protect vulnerable seniors from predators like Emma and Dr. Kellerman. On the 5th anniversary of the day Emma told me to leave my own house, I stood in the garden Richard and I had planted together. The roses were blooming, their fragrance filling the air. Joshua was coming for dinner, bringing his new girlfriend, a kind-hearted kindergarten teacher he'd met through mutual friends. Vanessa Wu would be there too, along with Dorothy Miller and several other colleagues from the foundation. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Mitchell. "Final Kellerman victim released from facility today, all 200 accounted for." I smiled, tears forming in my eyes. 200 lives reclaimed. 200 seniors who, like me, had been targeted, victimized, but ultimately saved. The Davis Foundation had grown to become the nation's leading organization for elder fraud prevention and response. We'd helped draft legislation that strengthened protections for seniors in 12 states. Our educational programs reached millions of elderly Americans each year, and our legal team had helped recover over $100 million in stolen assets for victims of elder fraud. Not bad for an old lady who was supposed to disappear quietly into a locked facility. As I cut roses for the dinner table, I thought about how different my life had become from what I'd expected in those dark days after Richard died. I'd imagined a quiet retirement, perhaps some volunteer work at the library, visits with Joshua and grandchildren someday. Instead, I'd found myself at the center of a national movement to protect elderly Americans from predators. I'd testified before Congress, appeared on television, written a book about my experience that became a bestseller. But more importantly, I'd discovered a strength within myself that I hadn't known existed. The strength to fight back when threatened. The courage to speak up when silenced. The determination to protect not just myself, but others who were vulnerable. That evening, as we gathered around my dining table, friends and family who had become my support system, Joshua raised his glass. "To my mother," he said, "who taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, and that one person really can change the world." I looked around the table at these people who had joined me in my mission, Vanessa with her legal brilliance, Dorothy with her educator's passion, Agent Mitchell with her unwavering dedication to justice, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Emma and Dr. Kellerman had targeted me because they thought I was vulnerable, isolated, an easy victim. They couldn't have been more wrong. To all of us, I replied, raising my own glass, and to every senior who refuses to be a victim. Later that night, after everyone had left, I stood in my kitchen, in my house, where no one would ever again tell me I didn't belong, and felt at peace. I was Kimberly Davis, 72 years old now, widow, mother, survivor, advocate, and I was just getting started. Thanks for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below with your experiences.